If I were to ask parents here in this room, what is your fear when your children walk out the door? I think a lot of us would find we have a lot in common, and in some relief, find that we're not alone in our fear. And I have a strong feeling that many of you parents go out and you have these conversations with your children and you share your fears in productive ways. You inform them, you talk with them, and you encourage them to make good decisions and stay out of trouble. We have to do this. They're not easy conversations to have, but we're charged to do this as parents. I know when I was 18 years old, we had MAD and SAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving and Students Against Drunk Driving. My parents shared their fears with me about me drinking and driving or getting in the car with someone else who was drinking and driving. I followed in their parenting footsteps, and I had conversations with my son Wilson about my fear of him drinking and driving. But I shared other fears that I had too. If I saw a news clip about teens taking pills, we talked. If I read an article about teens speeding, we talked. If I heard about a teen losing their life to drugs, we talked. I talked with my son, and I prided myself in thinking I am a good parent because I'm having these conversations with him. But recently, I just lost my son, and I've realized that there's a much bigger enemy right here in our community, and it's much stronger than a mother-son talk. Right now, we have an invasion of opioids in our community. Now, for some of us, we might think, this is kind of new on the scene, but actually, opioids have been around for over a century. They were first introduced during the Civil War as a pain relief to treat wounded soldiers. However, in the years to follow, those same soldiers began to develop dependencies and addictions to these opioids. If you think about opioids, a lot of times we put them into three categories. We have that prescription type of opioid when we think about Oxycontin and morphine, something we're kind of familiar with hearing about. Then we hear that word heroin, and most of the time our minds quickly go to that illegal substance that's a recreational drug, a derivative of the morphine. And then we hear that word fentanyl. Fentanyl has its place in our society. It's used to help trauma patients and cancer patients, but right now we have drug dealers who are using that to mask and unleash this enemy right here. If you look, you see that there are 3 waves of opioid overdoses that have occurred between 1999 and 2021. In 2013, we saw a huge spike in synthetic opioids. This includes fentanyl, and it's becoming one of our leading causes of death. So let's think, what is fentanyl anyway? Well, fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. It is FDA approved, but what is so different about fentanyl than other opioids is it is 100 times more potent. It's more potent than heroin, than morphine, than Oxycontin. In 2023, the overdose rate for fentanyl topped 112,000 according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Now let's put that number into perspective. Think about the 9th, 10th largest city here in North Carolina, like High Point, being wiped out from a fentanyl overdose. That is the equivalent of the same size. The CDC states that fentanyl right now is the leading cause of death in people between the ages of 18 and 45. Look in front of you, look behind you, look beside you. The majority of the people right here in this auditorium this evening fit that age category. But here is what is the most nefarious thing about fentanyl right now. Not only is it odorless and tasteless, it's being used to lace products such as marijuana, gummies, even candy such as Skittles. We use this word overdose, and when we hear that word, mainly we think about something that's been taken too much of, whether intentionally or not. But we have this new word that we're having to introduce into our society, and it's poisoning. And that's when someone is taking something that they don't realize what it is. Right now, we have drug dealers who are substituting the ingredients in pills to make counterfeit pills to look just like prescription medicine. That's scary because it is identical to what you see. The USDEA says that nearly half of all counterfeit pills are laced with a lethal dose of fentanyl. So we ask ourselves, why would these drug dealers want to give their clients something that's going to kill them? It's all about the money. That's all they care about. Because you see, it only takes a small dosage of fentanyl to give the same high as other opioids. So fentanyl becomes the more lucrative drug to sell. These drug dealers are thinking about building that addiction so they can get that repeat clientele and those return customers to make that money. They're playing chemists, they're playing doctors, they're playing pharmacists. And it only takes 5 grains of fentanyl to be lethal. But the drug dealers don't care, because the bottom line to them, it's all about making money. And here is what happened to my son, Wilson. Like many of you parents in here, you probably have the same agreement with your children as teenagers. You know, wake me up when you get home so I know you're home okay. So, like any other ordinary evening, Wilson comes home at 12:30. He comes in my room and says, "Hey, Mom, I just want to let you know I'm home." He played with the dog there at the end of the bed, and we began to talk. He said, "Hey, you know, tomorrow I'm going to go over to Dad's. I got to help him grind up a stump." I began to tell him about my plans for the next day. He said, "Well, you know, I want to sleep in the morning, so I probably won't be able to see or talk to you until later on in the afternoon." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Well, night, I love you." And I said, "I love you too." However, sometime in that night of Saturday, February 17th, 2024, my son died. Now, although this is an ongoing investigation and nothing has been confirmed, we suspect that Wilson ingested a drug such as fentanyl that took his life immediately. I think it goes without saying, he didn't know. He had no idea what he took that night was going to end his life. He had another friend who also lost his life. 2 young men devastated a community. It caused us all to ask those questions. Why? How? If these 2 young men could lose their life in the same manner, who else is going to lose their life? Where would they get such a substance? And why would they take it? But before I share with you what I have learned and continuing to learn, I want to take the time to share with you about my son. Meet Horace Wilson Moore IV. He was also very fondly known as Stick, Scooter, Willie. No matter what you called him, he was this kind, full of energy kid, and he could light up any room. You knew when he walked in because you felt his presence. Wilson was born on Saturday, February 19th, 2005, which was actually his due date. His dad liked to laugh and say that's the first and last time that boy has ever been on time in his life. I like to call him Christmas because just like Christmas you waited for all year, you'd wait and wait for him to get ready. But when he got ready, boy, he was a gift and you were glad he was there. Wilson graduated Heritage High School last year. And he decided to work for a while before thinking about college. It was when he started working for this surveyor that I saw this light in him just ignite. He was excited. He was coming home and telling me about what all he learned and about his day's adventures. Wilson was finding his niche, and he was starting to find himself. But here are the most important things that you need to know about my son. If my son saw an injustice in the world, he was there to make it right. Wilson was full of energy and full of joy. He could find the good in any situation and anyone. He loved being outdoors. He loved exploring. He loved figuring out things and how things worked. Wilson was a fierce friend. If you were his friend and had that honor, he would fight for you and stand up for you no matter what. Wilson never met a stranger. He knew people far and wide, across county lines and beyond. Wilson was also a great role model to kids. They looked up to him. His little brother and sister couldn't wait for Wilson to come over to their house to see him. He had little cousins and neighbors that also would flock to him, and Wilson took the time to make them feel special. But as a mom, the most comforting thing that I have about my son that I hold so dear was his strong faith. And like many of us, his faith may have wavered from time to time, but in his most difficult times in life, he clung to that faith. Now, I am just one of a long line of survivors that has had to suffer through these tragic circumstances. But I want to tell you about some good things that are happening right here in our community and people who are trying to make a difference. We have two out Raleigh, out of Harnett County. This nonprofit is a family who also lost their son in a very similar way. Just last year, they passed out 40 cans of Narcan. They talked to the children and the teens about where you can find fentanyl, where it exists, and how to equip yourself, and how to save lives. Barb Walsh, she is the founder of the nonprofit of Fentanyl Victims Network of North Carolina. She first founded this so people that were victims of this abuse and these deaths didn't feel alone, that they had a network to come to and to rally together. But she's taken it a step farther. Now she is looking at laws and ways that we can impact here in our community so this doesn't happen to anyone else. Right now, I am still grieving for my son while trying to celebrate his life. And I have to do this, and I have to do it for Wilson and honor him in this sacred way. It's not easy, and I don't know where I'm going to go with this and what this is going to look like. But I can tell you what I do know. I am going to fight this enemy in this community for Wilson. I do know that he touched so many lives, and he was loved by the multitudes. His life mattered, and this is going to be used to save not just one life, but his story will be to save thousands. Tonight is only the beginning. You will hear and you will see me again. Our theme for this evening is reimagine. I want you to reimagine how we can prevent this from happening to another child, another neighbor, another friend, another colleague, anyone out there. I want you to reimagine how we can educate ourselves and teach one another so this does not happen, and that we can find ways to teach us to not take prescription drugs that don't belong to us, to look at these labels that we see, and to not experiment with drugs. We have to reimagine this because fentanyl's here, and those drug dealers are pushing it because they want money. But if you want to ask me what you can start doing right now this evening, I'm going to tell you, to all of you parents, to all of you friends, families, leaders, anyone out there, don't stop talking. Learn with each other and your children about fentanyl. Find out where it exists. Take politics out of this. Every one of us has to think of the solutions, and we all have to be on board. We all have to be together as we go through this journey. We have someone who had to reimagine their life and has made a huge impact. Jason DeFord. Most of us know Jason DeFord as Jelly Roll. His story is really unique because not only was he a drug user, he was a drug dealer. But just this past January, he went to speak in front of Congress to talk about anti-fentanyl legislation. He said, "I was once part of the problem. I stand before you now as a man to be part of the solution." Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to get our heads out of the sand. You cannot say, "Not me, not my child." You can't pretend that you are the untouchables. If you do, you become part of the problem, and we have to be part of the solution. On February 19th, 2005, my life was changed forever for the better because I got the honor and the privilege to become Wilson Moore's mom. I chose to live my life for him then. I'm going to continue to live my life for him now. I choose to be part of the solution. Thank you. Thank you.